UFC 316, Volkanovski versus Lopes. The UFC heads to Miami this weekend for a beast of a card. Let's go ahead and break down these fights. This should be a really good one. First, we have Nora Cornolle taking on Hailey, Cowan. Cornolle lost a close decision to Jacqueline Cavalcanti in her home country of France. She had some success grappling, and she did land some hard shots on on Cavalcanti, who I think is a really solid fighter. So she looks pretty dangerous on the feet. She looks like she's, willing to slug it out. Hailey Cowan doesn't have the best record. She's 7-3, but I think she looks better than her record indicates. She's got decent power, and I honestly anticipate a slugfest in this fight. I think these two are both going to be willing to really let their hands loose, and it's going to be a close one, but I think Cornolle is going to win the decision here. I think she's just a bit better, a bit crisper on the feet than Hailey Cowan. Next is Tresean Gore taking on Marco Tulio. Tulio, I am really excited about as a prospect, and he had to work for his UFC contract. He went 2-0 in the Contender Series. First, he beat Yusri Belgarui, who is obviously a pretty accomplished kickboxer, and they didn't give him a contract, and then he came back and got another KO, spinning back kick to this guy's liver, put him down, and then he comes into the UFC and gets a KO over Potiera in his debut. So he's doing all the right things, and he looks damn good doing it. He's taking on Tresean Gore, who is coming off of 2 back-to-back submission wins, both guillotines. That's definitely his best move, his signature move. If he gets a hold of your neck, he's just so strong. We have yet to really see anybody escape when he gets deep on their neck like that. But I'm not sure we've really seen a whole lot from the rest of his game to indicate that he's going to have much for Tulio on the feet. And I think Tulio's just going to find a KO here. I think he's a lot more experienced. I think he's got a lot more power on the feet, and he's going to beat Tresean Gore here. Next up is Sumudaerji versus Mitch Raposo. Sumudaerji has lost 3 in a row, and he's 3-4 overall in his UFC career. Really, the highlight of his career is finishing Malcolm Gordon, so not a whole lot to speak for, honestly. And Raposo, on the other hand, is still unproven, and he kind of had a stinker versus Andre Lima. But we still don't really know what level Mitch Raposo is at. Whereas, on the other hand, I'm fairly certain that Sumudaerji just is not, a high-caliber flyweight fighter. So we're going to take Raposo by decision. He's going to be a bit smaller, but I think he showed some stuff in his Contender Series fight to indicate that he should have a chance here versus Sumudaerji. Next is Sedriques Dumas taking on Michal Oleksiejczuk. And Oleksiejczuk is the favorite here despite going 1-4 in his last 5 fights. We know what he's going to do. He's going to march forward. He's going to really push the pressure onto Dumas. And really, for me in this fight, I think it's telling that Dumas is yet to have a finish in the UFC. And if you're not posing that threat to a guy like Oleksiejczuk, he's just going to march you down. And I think he's just going to pressure Dumas, and I think Dumas is just going to crumble, to be honest. He just doesn't really have the power to, I think, keep Oleksiejczuk off of him, and I think Oleksiejczuk finds a KO in this matchup. Next up is Darren Elkins taking on Julian Erosa. 44 combined UFC fights between these two guys, obviously a matchup of 2 vets. Elkins is the more veteran of the two. He's been in the UFC since 2010, and he's got 29 or so fights in the UFC, I want to say. And he definitely has some fight left in him. He's won 2 in a row now. He beat TJ Brown and Pineda in his last 2 fights. Erosa, on the other hand, I think is just slightly better, though, at this point in their respective careers. He's coming off of a couple submission wins in recent fights. And yes, Elkins has only been submitted once, but I think he's really going to need to sell out and, risk it to land some of these takedowns on Julian Erosa. And that's when Erosa is at his most dangerous. He just is so slick with his jiu-jitsu, and he's one of the few submission guys who I genuinely think anytime he steps into the octagon, he's got a chance to submit his opponent. And so I think he's going to find one here over Darren Elkins and win this one by submission. Next up is Jim Miller taking on Chase Hooper. Hooper is the heaviest favorite on the card. I mean, I've seen him at like minus 1,000. And he submitted 3 guys in a row: Jordan Levitt, Vyacheslav Borshov, and Clay Guida. So, he's riding pretty high right now. I think Jim Miller is better than the 3 of those guys, although he's kind of in a similar tier, you could say. But Jim Miller's got a lot of fight in him left as well. Like, he's got 3 finishes in his last 4 wins. Obviously, the Bobby Green fight did not go very well. The speed difference was pretty substantial, and he just couldn't really close the gap there. But, I think Chase Hooper still has a lot to prove on the feet, and this is going to be a good opportunity for him to do that. Miller is, a really good grappler himself. He's got a bunch of submission wins to his name. So this should be a really good fight. I think, the line is a bit crazy. I would not have Chase Hooper as a 10-1 favorite, but I still think he should have the edge in this one, just being a lot younger. I think he's going to have more in the tank the longer this fight goes on, and I think he's going to find a decision in this one versus Jim Miller. Next up is Xiaonan taking on Virna Jandiroba. And this is a bad matchup for Xiaonan. I'm just going to get straight to the point here. She did just beat Tabitha Ricci, who's another, quote-unquote, grappling fighter. She has that judo background. And she's landed some good takedowns in her UFC career, but we really haven't... I wouldn't think of her as a grappler when it comes to her MMA game. And Xiaonan is taking on Virna Jandiroba, who is one of the strongest grapplers in the division. We saw Zhang Weili just completely have her way with Xiaonan when wrestling, and Virna is not as good of as a wrestler as Zhang Weili. I don't think her takedowns are nearly as good. But when she gets you down, you're just not getting up. And I think that's just going to be all it really takes for her to beat Xiaonan. I think she gets her to the ground, she's going to be able to keep her there. And, Jandiroba is just so slick. I think she can find a submission in this fight versus Xiaonan. Next is Dan Ige taking on Sean Woodson. Ige, obviously, he is the gatekeeper at 145. He's pretty much the litmus test for all the guys who are looking to be ranked. If you think you're legit, beat Ige. He just fought, Diego Lopes and Lerone Murphy, obviously 2 of the, biggest contenders in the division. Of course, Diego Lopes is headlining this card. Ige, his boxing is still as crisp as pretty much anyone in the divisions. And it should make for a really interesting stand-up fight versus Sean Woodson, who is obviously a freak at 145 because he's so tall, so long. There's not really anyone like him in the featherweight division that I can think of. He's won 4 straight. Tough matchup for everyone pretty much with that length. And this should be a close one, but I think Woodson is just going to land a bit more often. I do think Ige is going to find some success, and he definitely could hurt Sean Woodson. Those long arms, I do think, can be a bit of a hindrance when you get up real close because, other guys can just land a bit quicker with their shorter reaches. But that being said, I think Woodson's just going to do a lot of work on the outside to win this one on the cards. We're taking Woodson by split decision. I think it's going to be a controversial win here, and it wouldn't be Sean Woodson's first. Next up is a light heavyweight matchup between Nikita Krylov and Dominick Reyes. Krylov, obviously the number 8 light heavyweight in the world, and he's not bad by any means, but looking at his resume, I would not expect him to be a top 10 worthy guy if he just did the blind resume trick. That's the state of the light heavyweight division. Obviously, his grappling is really good. He's got a lot of submission wins, and he's shown some power on the feet as well. So he's definitely a finisher. But, he's just kind of a bland fighter. He doesn't really move the needle promotionally. And I think that's kind of why he seems to kind of be in this purgatory of like the, 5 to 10 ranked range. And I kind of see him staying there. He's taking on Dominick Reyes, who went through a really tough stretch. He got KO'd 3 times after he got, let's just say he got robbed in that John Jones fight. That's been my stance on that fight pretty much forever. And, got KO'd 3 times versus Yair and Span. And those are 3 super tough, well, at least 2 super tough guys. And very few guys come back from that. But here's Dominick Reyes coming off of 2 straight KO wins of his own. And, really starting to gain a little bit of momentum here. Obviously, that photo came out where he looked out of shape. I'm not going to overanalyze that. I don't think that's really worth spending any time on at all. This should be a close fight. And we're going to take Dominick Reyes to win this one by KO. I've liked what I've seen out of him lately, and I think Krylov, sometimes, I think he's just not the most consistent guy in the cage. And I think Dominick Reyes really has the chance to bring it to him here and find a KO. Next up is Bryce Mitchell taking on Jean Silva. Another super anticipated matchup here. And Bryce has kind of been the trendy pick online, it seems. And the clips are circulating of him, obviously John Silva versus Jourdain, where Jourdain took him down a bunch of times. And sure, John Silva has been taken down before in the UFC, but how did those fights all end? And that's kind of what I've been asking myself. And the question really remains, is Bryce that much better than Charles Jourdain? And I'm not sure you can definitively say, yes, he's significantly better. Is he better? Sure. But is he that much better? I don't know if you can really say that. I think John Silva is just the much more explosive athlete. We saw what Josh Emmett did to Bryce Mitchell, and I think Silva has just as much power as Josh Emmett and faster hands. And I think Mitchell's getting put out cold here. We're taking Silva by KO. I think he's just going to be overwhelming Bryce Mitchell with his power. Next up on the main card is a fight that kind of flew under the radar a bit, but I'm super excited for. It is Yair Rodriguez taking on Patricio Pitbull. Yair's 2-3 in his last 5, and one of those 2 wins was that Ortega fight where the injury occurred. So really only has 1 win in his last several fights. And yeah, I'm not going to say I'm a Yair Rodriguez hater, but I've never really been sold on him as an elite contender. I thought he kind of got a soft matchup in Josh Emmett for the interim belt. Not that Emmett's, an easy fight, but as far as, fights for a belt of any sort, I think that's on the easier end of the matchups you can get. And I think his striking is flashy, but it's just not that effective. So I'm just really not sold as him. I think he's honestly better as a submission guy than he is on the feet, where I think we've seen guys time and time again land the more effective shots. Pitbull is 2-3 in his last 5 fights, and he's 37 years old. He's up there in age, but his hands are so legit. He just KO'd Jeremy Kennedy. Is it the most impressive win ever? No, but he looked pretty good in that fight. And yeah, I just go back to the boxing of Patricio Pitbull here, and I think it's a lot slicker than Yair Rodriguez. He's got fast hands, and I think he's got a lot more power than Yair Rodriguez. I think he's going to win a decision here over Yair Rodriguez and just land a lot harder shots. And I think he's just going to find the chin of Rodriguez more so than Rodriguez will in return. And that should be a really interesting fight. I think Patricio Pitbull might not have too many fights left in him, but I like his game a lot. Our co-main event is Michael Chandler taking on Paddy Pimblett. Pimblett 6-0 in the UFC. Got a lot of momentum off the heels of that round 1 submission over Bobby Green. A much needed finish from Paddy Pimblett, who was definitely, losing favor in a lot of MMA fans. I, definitely was and am still having my doubts about Paddy Pimblett against the elites of the division. That, Jared Gordon fight still kind of, is in the back of my head, where he definitely lost that fight, and we saw kind of the difference on the feet, and even just from like a physicality standpoint, a lot of red flags from Paddy Pimblett in that matchup. But I wouldn't say that he's really taking on the elites of the division. Michael Chandler's 1-4 in his last 5, and he's pretty consistently lost to the Oliveras, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. He has not really proven that he's that guy in the UFC. But obviously super dangerous, insane power. And so I think he's got the tools to make this a really interesting fight. If this fight took place, 2-3 years ago, I think I'd be picking Chandler with confidence. But right now, I don't know. Paddy Pimblett, I think we've seen some growth from him up to this point in the UFC. I imagine he's going to, pace himself a bit here and be a bit tentative to start. And Chandler's got that wrestling background, but I think if Pimblett, if it gets into a scramble, I think Pimblett can definitely find a lot of success. And, if Chandler shoots in a takedown and isn't, careful about what he's doing, he could definitely get caught into a submission, because Paddy Pimblett definitely has some of the best jiu-jitsu in the division. So we're taking Paddy Pimblett by decision. I think Chandler's a hard guy to put away. And I don't know, he doesn't have much of a neck to choke, but I think Pimblett can just win some of those scrambles. And if he doesn't even get the submissions, I think he can get some big moments in this fight, coming close to some submissions. So Pimblett by decision is the pick. Finally, we have our main event. It is Alexander Volkanovski taking on Diego Lopes for the vacated featherweight belt. I'm going to start this by saying Volk, I think, is the best fighter I've ever really seen, and, seen as a guy who really knows what he's looking at. Obviously, I was around during the John Jones title reign, and there's no doubt that he's the greatest of all time. Either John Jones or Mighty Mouse, I think, are the only people with a legitimate claim at the greatest of all time. But with my own 2 eyes, where I'm watching every single fight, and, I actually have some sort of understanding of what I'm watching, I don't think I've really seen anyone like Volk. And it really culminated in that first Islam Makhachev fight, where he was taking on, a pretty much unbeatable guy in Islam Makhachev at that point, and took him to the absolute brink, and really physically and mentally broke down Islam Makhachev. And I came away from that fight, despite Volk losing, saying I've never really seen anything like that guy. And then, of course, the rematch comes around. Short notice, Volk, coming to the rescue to save the card, and he gets KO'd by Islam. And, no one can really believe what they're seeing, because he just looks so unbeatable up to that point. And in the wake of that first loss to Islam Makhachev, I thought Volk said some kind of troubling things. He said he was afraid to let his hands go, and it wasn't a thing that I think people really made a big deal out of, but I think that's a red flag for a guy who, has as many miles as Volkanovski has, who kind of made his career off letting his hands go, having some of the slickest striking in the UFC. And the fact that he was kind of having those thoughts, I thought, was the first red flag. And then he goes and faces a guy like Ilia Topuria, who's young, athletic, has a lot of burst, and he gets caught and put out again. And he's taking on a guy here who is not Ilia Topuria, not nearly the level of boxer in Diego Lopes, but Diego Lopes has legitimate power. He's wobbled several people since he's been in the UFC. Obviously, he came in, took that Evloev fight on short notice, a fight that nobody really wanted to mess with. Had Evloev on the verge of defeat at a couple different points in that fight, and pretty much never looked back from there, and has looked pretty stellar in every fight. So I thought, honestly, his worst performance to date was that Dan Ige fight, and that was kind of an interesting scenario because he's taking on a totally fresh opponent at lightweight, and a tough guy in Dan Ige who had absolutely nothing to lose. So pretty odd situation to be put in. And then obviously he had the Brian Ortega fight where I think that's probably the closest someone has ever come to a KO without actually getting a KO. He puts Ortega out cold, and then he wakes him up with the right hand. It was never really seen anything like that. And it's that kind of power that really worries me in this matchup. Because I don't know if Volk can really match up from a power standpoint. Obviously, in between the second Islam fight and the Topuria fight, he had that fight over with Yair Rodriguez where he had one of the best finishes of the year. Like, I think if you're trying to find just the most textbook, like, how to get a guy out of there, like, finishing sequence, that's one of the best ones I really have ever seen. He looks so slick. But still, just that power difference worries me a lot here. I think Lopes is just the more athletic, stronger guy, and I think he's going to find a KO here, as much as it pains me to say it. And I'm just going to leave you all with this one remark, which is that nobody has really ever come back from what Volk has gone through. Like, has anyone been finished twice in 3 fights, 3 championship fights, and then came back to win the belt again? And I'm not sure that has ever happened. But with that being said, I'm not sure there's ever really been another Volkanovski. So I'll leave you with that. Obviously, the official pick is still going to be Lopes by KO. But that will be the breakdown. Thank you all for watching. Should be a monster, awesome, electric card. And we will catch you on the next one.